I was the only human for billions of kilometers. That's what I believed, until the station stopped behaving like a machine. Outpost K-47 orbited an ice moon locked in permanent shadow. The gas giant it circled filled the sky in slow bands of copper and gray, its gravity pulling fractures across the frozen crust below. From orbit, the moon looked like shattered glass suspended in darkness. The station was a relic, once a mineral relay hub, now reclassified in my contract as legacy preservation infrastructure, which usually meant abandoned, but still powered. I'm a licensed maintenance contractor. Obsolete alien systems, long-duration autonomous facilities, structural drift correction. I don't chase mysteries. I recalibrate reactors, replace failing thermal regulators, and keep forgotten installations from tearing themselves apart. 6-month rotation. Isolation bonus. No crew. The corridors curved in non-human geometries, alloy walls grown seamless instead of welded. The air carried a faint metallic tang, ionized coolant and recycled filtration. Frost traced thin veins along bulkheads where insulation had degraded over centuries. The station had a rhythm. Reactor hum steady and low. Thermal plates ticking as they compensated for temperature shifts. Predictable. Machines are predictable. That's why I noticed the deviation immediately. At 312 station cycle, Reactor 2 increased output by 0.9%. No drone launch. No scheduled preservation cycle. No environmental fluctuation. Just a clean, deliberate draw of power from a sector flagged inactive. I pulled up the internal grid. For half a second, a subsystem tag flickered into view. Sublevel 9, Cryostasis Node 01. Then it vanished. My contract listed no cryostasis node. But something down there had just requested power. Sublevel 9 wasn't on any of my schematics. But power doesn't reroute itself without a destination. I traced the anomaly through secondary conduits beneath the station's central spine. The energy draw terminated at a bulkhead I'd previously logged as solid structural plating. This time, my scanner returned a faint resonance behind it. A hollow space. The seam was nearly invisible, grown alloy fused with precision that didn't match the rest of the station's aging construction. My contractor override hesitated for a few seconds before the panel retracted. Cold air spilled out. Not ambient station chill. Preserved cold. Controlled. My breath fogged immediately as I stepped inside. The hatch sealed behind me with a silent glide. The corridor sloped downward at a shallow angle. Walls seamless and faintly luminous, embedded filaments casting a sterile blue glow. No exposed conduits. No corrosion. No frost creeping along edges. Too clean. Too silent. Even the distant reactor hum felt muted here, as if this section had been acoustically insulated from the rest of the station. My boots echoed softly. The sound disappeared too quickly. The corridor opened into a chamber. Vast. Circular. Tiered. Rows of cryogenic pods stretched outward in concentric arcs, stacked along stepped platforms that rose toward the curved walls. Transparent upper panels rimmed with frost. Blue status indicators glowing uniformly. Inside each pod, a woman. Not human. Elongated limbs. High cheekbones. Dark hair suspended weightlessly in frozen suspension medium. Skin faintly opalescent beneath crystalline frost. I turned slowly. There were hundreds in view. Then I stepped forward and saw the chamber's full curvature. 1,000. It felt like a cemetery without death. My wrist console vibrated. Cryostasis array. 1,000 occupants. Status. Preservation active. Security classification. Sovereign directive. Preservation. The word felt wrong. I walked along the nearest arc, scanning indicators. Stable. 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 Amber. Pod 001. Neural fluctuation detected. Stasis degradation, 3.1% and rising. The frost along her viewing panel had thinned, revealing faint eyelid movement beneath. The system interface expanded automatically. Manual intervention available. Test revival sequence, single unit. Warning. Activation voids preservation compliance. Unauthorized action classified as interference. There it was. Do not interfere. If I did nothing, the pod would fail within hours. The system would log the loss and redistribute power to preserve the remaining 999. One life quietly reduced to a statistic. Machines are predictable. If something is failing, you repair it. I stared at the amber indicator. I wasn't here to question imperial directives. I was here to maintain infrastructure. This was infrastructure. Failing. I exhaled slowly, the cold air burning faintly in my lungs. This is maintenance, I muttered to the empty chamber. No heroics. No rebellion. Just reluctance. My finger hovered over the activation control longer than necessary. Then I pressed it. The pod reacted instantly. Internal lights flared white. Frost fractured across the viewing panel in branching cracks. Coolant drained with a sharp hiss, vapor spilling across the chamber floor. Inside, her body convulsed once, hard and involuntary. The lid split along its seam and lifted. For a suspended second, nothing moved. Then she drew her first breath, and her silver eyes opened. She didn't scream. She didn't struggle against restraints that were no longer there. She inhaled. Slowly. Deliberately. As if she had paused rather than slept. Coolant vapor rolled off her shoulders in thin ribbons. She pushed herself upright with controlled precision, muscles responding smoothly despite centuries of suspension. Her silver eyes locked onto me the instant they opened, clear, focused, assessing. No panic. No confusion. You are not Imperial, she said. Her voice was low and even. No, I replied. Maintenance contractor. She swung her legs over the edge of the pod and stood, taller than me by a few centimeters. Bare feet touched the alloy floor without hesitation. Her gaze moved over me, jacket seams, diagnostic pad in my hand, the absence of visible weaponry. Species designation, she asked. Human. The words settled into her expression like data being catalogued. You are alone, she observed. Yeah. A pause followed. Not tense. Just thoughtful. You initiated my revival intentionally. Yes. Why? I could have framed it as protocol. A systems test. An accident. Instead, I told the truth. Your pod was degrading. You were going to fail. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not suspicious, just analytical. You intervened to prevent termination. That's the job. She stepped closer. Not aggressively. Not cautiously. Simply closing the distance to examine the anomaly standing in front of her. Up close, faint geometric patterns shimmered beneath the opalescent tone of her skin, biological latticework catching the chamber's blue light. She lifted her hand slowly, giving me time to move away. I didn't. Her fingers brushed the back of my glove. Warm. Her eyes shifted subtly at the contact. You are not preserved, she said. No. You continue without suspension? Mostly. She turned her hand and pressed her palm fully against mine. The warmth was steady. Alive. Not archived. Something changed in her gaze then, not gratitude, not awe. Recognition. Behind us, 999 pods remained silent, blue-lit and motionless. The chamber had felt like a mausoleum when I entered. Now it felt different. Occupied. She lowered her hand slowly but didn't step back. And standing there, in a chamber built for silence, I realized something unexpected. I didn't want it to go quiet again. Her name was Ceres. She offered it without ceremony, as if names were coordinates, useful, not sentimental. You will not leave the others, she said quietly, her gaze sweeping across the endless arcs of frozen figures. It wasn't a plea. It was a projection. I brought the system interface back up. Power distribution remained stable after the first revival. Pod 002 showed optimal integrity. Then 003. Then 004. I can initiate additional revivals, I said. Sequential activation. Reduced strain. Ceres studied the power curves for a moment, absorbing the margins and risks. Proceed. No drama. Just inevitability. I triggered the next pod. The second awakening was immediate. The lid split open and the woman inside surged upright before the coolant had fully drained. Her silver eyes ignited with sharp awareness. She stepped out in one fluid motion, shoulders squared, stance balanced like someone expecting opposition. Her gaze locked onto me. "You initiated release," she said.
"Yes."
She assessed me openly. Height, posture, lack of visible weapons. "You are not enhanced."
"No."
A flicker of contained heat crossed her expression. "Not hostility. Fire without chaos." "I am Valen," she said. "Maintenance contractor," I replied. "That is occupation." "It's sufficient." For a moment, tension tightened the air between us. Then Valen shifted position, placing herself slightly ahead of Ceres, scanning the chamber perimeter as if anticipating Imperial retrieval units. Protective instinct, alive and immediate. The third pod opened more gently. The woman inside stirred slowly, breath shallow at first, then deepening. When her feet touched the floor, her knees wavered. I stepped forward automatically. She steadied herself by gripping my sleeve. Her hand was warm, her grip surprisingly firm. "Thank you," she said softly. Her voice carried no edge, just warmth. "Lyrian," Ceres said. Lyrian's gaze moved across the chamber, taking in the rows of still frozen women. Her expression shifted, not anger, not fear. Grief. "So many," she whispered. Valen's jaw tightened. "Then we wake them." The differences between them were clear. Ceres, calm anchor, thinking in systems and consequence. Valen, fire, protective, ready to confront threats that might no longer exist. Lyrian, care, already adjusting environmental controls, raising the chamber temperature slightly to ease the shock of revival. They didn't compete. They aligned. Alive again. I initiated another pod. Then another. With each awakening, the chamber transformed. Breath layered over breath. Voices replaced silence. Newly revived women steadied one another instinctively. Those who regained balance first turned immediately to help the next. Women helping women. No one waited to be led. Through it all, I remained at the console, monitoring reactor output, rerouting power, keeping the grid within tolerance. At some point, I became aware of something subtle. When Ceres finished orienting a newly awakened cluster, her gaze flicked toward me. When Valen completed a perimeter sweep and found no threat, her eyes lingered briefly on my hands at the controls. When Lyrian steadied someone trembling, she glanced back as if confirming I was still there. It wasn't gratitude. It wasn't dependence. It was assessment. I was the only unfamiliar variable in a reality that had just restarted. And they were watching me, quietly deciding what kind of presence I was. The cryostasis grid wasn't just life support. It was curated. Power routing beneath the chamber floor revealed a secondary archive core, shielded behind sovereign encryption layers older than the station itself. If this vault existed, there would be documentation explaining why. Empires justify their decisions. Even the quiet ones. I accessed the hidden partition using my contractor credentials. The system resisted briefly, then unfolded. An imperial crest bloomed across the display. Sharp geometry, rigid symmetry. Clearance tiers scrolled past, tied to offices long dissolved. Subject classification, Strategic Governance Cohort. Sector designation, Autonomous Polity, Matriarchal. Assessment, Ideological Divergence, Persistent. Ceres stepped closer to read. Valen stood rigid at my right. Lyrian remained near a dormant pod, her palm resting lightly against the frost. Primary recommendation, public dissolution of leadership via execution. Denied. Revised directive. Public destruction deemed destabilizing. Risk of martyrdom cascade unacceptable. Alternative containment authorized. I scrolled. Population to be removed from historical record. Transferred under preservation mandate. Converted into a living warning. The phrase hung in sterile font. Converted into a living warning. Supplementary analysis. Objective, neutralize ideological contagion without violent spectacle. Method, long-term cryogenic suspension. Public narrative, Voluntary strategic withdrawal pending integration. A lie wrapped in administrative calm. No battlefield. No massacre. No graves. Just absence. Destruction is loud. Preservation can be crueler. They hadn't been killed because killing them would have amplified them. Leaders executed publicly become symbols. Symbols ignite movements. So the empire chose silence. 1,000 strategists, scientists, governors, removed from time. Distributed across remote holdings. Perfectly preserved. Completely erased from history. Erased without blood. Valen's jaw tightened. They feared continuity. Yes, Ceres said quietly. We were not insurgents. We were an alternative. Further down, a final notation appeared. Reactivation protocol. Prohibited. Unauthorized revival classified as treason against imperial stability. Automated alert trigger enabled upon mass activation. I checked the alert network. Dormant. The prison had outlived its wardens. I leaned back from the console. No shouting. No dramatic outrage. Just a steady tightening beneath my ribs. I had woken 1. Then 2. Then 3. 997 still suspended because an empire had calculated that silence was more effective than slaughter. They weren't archived artifacts. They were political hostages. I looked across the chamber again. 1,000 blue-lit pods arranged with mathematical precision. Not neglect. Not decay. Policy. Maintenance. The system was functioning exactly as designed. That realization carried more weight than anger. This wasn't preservation. It was suppression. And standing there, with imperial language still glowing cold on the display, I understood something with complete clarity. This wasn't an archive. It was a prison. I pulled my contract back up. Outpost K. 47. Legacy Preservation Infrastructure. Scope, Reactor Calibration, Structural Stabilization, Cryostasis Integrity Maintenance. Restrictions. Do not interfere with archived imperial assets. Violation penalty. Immediate termination of license. Asset seizure. Civil prosecution. Do not interfere. It had sounded routine when I signed. A legal boundary around forgotten systems no one wanted to revisit. Now it read like instructions to maintain a prison. Behind me, 3 women stood awake in a chamber designed to silence a civilization. 997 remained suspended. Ceres didn't push. Valen didn't demand. Lyrian simply rested her hand against a dormant pod, as if measuring the cold of centuries. No one asked me to do anything. That made the decision heavier. I expanded the full cryostasis grid. Minimal stasis required steady baseline power, just enough to suppress neural activity and halt biological decay. Sustainable indefinitely. Full revival was a different equation. Simultaneous activation of all pods would overload Reactor 3 within seconds. Thermal cascade risk unacceptable. Structural stress beyond safe limits. I adjusted the model. Sequential activation. Batches of 10. Stabilization intervals between cycles. I began shutting down non-essential systems in simulation. Cargo bay climate control, offline. External lighting arrays, offline. Long-range communications, disabled. Mining drone recharge grid, suspended. The power curve flattened. Barely. Reactor 1, 63%. Reactor 2, 58%. Reactor 3, peaking at 79% during activation waves, but within survivable tolerance. If you proceed, Ceres said quietly, studying the projections, this structure will no longer function as intended. It wasn't intended for anything good, I replied. Valen stepped closer. Failure probability. Low enough, I said. Not 0. And detection. There's an automated alert tied to mass revival, I said. The network is degraded, but a surge this size leaves a footprint. You will be marked hostile, Valen said. Yes. The word didn't waver. I could walk away. Log sublevel 9 as sealed archival integrity verified. Complete the rotation. Leave the system running exactly as designed. No one would question it. The Empire's quiet cruelty would continue humming beneath the ice moon. I ran the numbers again. The grid could handle it. Strained. Reconfigured. Redirected. But capable. I wasn't a soldier. I wasn't staging a rebellion. I was an engineer standing in front of a system built to suppress life quietly and efficiently. And I had temporary authority over it. Ceres watched my face, not the data. "You owe us nothing," she said. "I know. You could leave." "Yes." Valen's gaze sharpened. "Then why remain at the console?" "Because maintenance without judgment becomes complicity. Because preservation had been weaponized. Because if a system is wrong and you can change it, doing nothing is still a decision." But I didn't say any of that. I looked at the stabilized power curve one final time. It was possible. That was enough. "If it can be done," I said quietly, "then it must be done." No declaration. No promise. Just a conclusion drawn from math and conscience intersecting. I accessed the master cryostasis control. Full array sequential activation. Disabled. Manual override. Available. Estimated energy surge. Severe. Alert suppression. Partial. Confirm initiation. Behind me, 3 sets of silver eyes waited in silence. Around us, 997 futures remained suspended. I placed my finger over the confirmation key. And let it hover. I pressed confirm. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then the station roared. Reactor output surged so violently the deck plates trembled beneath my boots. Conduits along the chamber walls flared white-blue as energy flooded into the cryostasis grid. Frost splintered across hundreds of viewing panels at once, cracks racing outward like lightning through ice. "Stabilize," I muttered, eyes locked on the power curve as it climbed toward red. The first wave triggered. 10 pods. Coolant vented in sharp hisses, vapor spilling low across the chamber floor. Lids split open in synchronized motion. Bodies jerked once as neural activity reignited. Then, breaths. Uneven. Ragged. Real. Coughing echoed across the chamber. The second wave initiated before the vapor cleared. Another 10. Then another. The silence that had defined this place for centuries fractured. Not into chaos. Into life. Valen moved first, catching a woman whose legs buckled. Ceres stepped into the center of a forming cluster, voice calm and steady. "You are safe. The Empire is absent. Breathe." Lyrian knelt beside another, guiding her inhale and exhale until rhythm returned. Hands found hands. Shoulders steadied shoulders. Women helping women. Those who regained balance first turned immediately to assist the next. No one waited to be instructed. No one stood alone for long. Sequential activation rippled outward in expanding arcs. Rows that had been museum still came alive in waves. Frost cascaded to the floor in crystalline sheets. Coolant drained through grates that hadn't carried fluid in generations. I rerouted power continuously. External lighting arrays shut down. Cargo bays dimmed. Long-range sensors went dark. All energy redirected inward. To this chamber. To them. Voices rose. Confusion, disbelief, realization. Some wept openly when memory returned. Some stood in stunned silence, silver eyes scanning a galaxy that had erased them. Some simply breathed, as if afraid the air might be taken again. 1,000 preserved warnings becoming 1,000 conscious minds. I had thought of them as numbers. Load calculations. Capacity thresholds. A problem to engineer around. Standing in the center of the chamber as breath layered over breath, as sound replaced centuries of stillness, I understood the scale differently. 1,000 isn't a number. It's 1,000 futures restarting. Each pod contained a strategist, a scientist, a leader once deemed too dangerous to kill publicly. Each breath drawn now reintroduced possibility into a galaxy that had chosen silence over slaughter. Valen established a perimeter instinctively, scanning for threats that no longer existed. Ceres anchored newly awakened groups with measured explanation. Lyrian moved constantly, checking for neural instability, steadying trembling hands. They organized themselves. Alive again. I stood at the console, overwhelmed, not by fear, but by weight. I hadn't meant to become anything more than the technician who pressed a key. But as the final sector cued, I felt responsibility settle fully onto my shoulders. "Last array," I whispered. "Reactor 3 edged near its upper limit." I diverted power from deep core reserves, pushing everything into the final surge. The last row ignited. Pods split open in bright succession. Coolant vapor rose like fog under cold light. The final suspended figures stirred, silver eyes opening to a world that had tried to forget them. Those already standing turned to witness. Not cheering. Bearing witness. One by one, the last 10 stepped free. The chamber quieted, not into silence, but into shared awareness. The master console chimed. Cryostasis array status. All units. Active. Preservation mode. Terminated. I turned slowly. 1,000 silver gazes met mine. Not worship. Not obedience. Recognition. Behind me, the final indicator shifted from blue to green. Final pod lights green. It took a week to turn a vault into a launch point. Reactor loads were recalibrated for sustained habitation instead of suspension. Hangar doors that hadn't opened in centuries groaned back to motion. Mining transports were stripped of drilling assemblies and refitted with life support modules. Navigation arrays were updated to reflect star maps that had shifted long after these women were erased from them. No one celebrated. They organized. Clusters formed naturally, strategists comparing fragmented records, scientists reconstructing lost research, administrators mapping out who would go where. History didn't return in a speech. It returned in quiet conversations. Sayeri's coordinated departures without claiming command. Valen's supervised system sweeps to ensure no dormant Imperial failsafe remained hidden in the station's architecture. Lyrian moved through the corridors, checking neural recovery and offering steady reassurance to those still adjusting to time regained. When the first shuttle detached from Outpost K-47, there was no ceremony. Engines flared briefly against the ice moon's fractured horizon. Then it was gone. Others followed at measured intervals. Not a frantic escape. A deliberate unfolding. The station grew lighter with each departure. Corridors that had echoed with 1,000 voices softened into something calmer. Not empty. Just quieter. Some paused before boarding. A brief clasp of my forearm. A nod. Direct eye contact that carried acknowledgement without reverence. No speeches. No pledges. Valen approached before her assigned launch window. "You altered a constant the Empire believed permanent," she said. "I adjusted a system," I replied. Her gaze held mine for a moment. "We will ensure it remains adjusted." She turned and boarded. Lyrian lingered longer. She adjusted a panel beside me that didn't need adjusting. "You will not return to isolation," she said softly. "I've managed worse," I answered. She smiled faintly and stepped onto her shuttle. Ceres was among the last. We stood together in the observation bay, watching the ice moon drift below. The gas giant loomed beyond, immense and indifferent. "Our civilization will not resume as it was," she said. "Nothing ever does." A final shuttle launched beneath us, engines carving a brief arc of light into darkness. Her assigned transport waited in the adjacent hangar. She did not move toward it. "You're staying," I said. "Yes." "For what reason?" She considered the question without hesitation. "Freedom," she said, "is not only departure. It is choosing where to stand. You're choosing here. For now." There was no debt in her voice. No obligation. Just choice. Outside the viewport, the last shuttle cleared the station's gravity well and disappeared into the starfield. Reactor output stabilized. External arrays remained dark, not from neglect, but intention. Billions of kilometers from the nearest human. Not alone. I leaned against the railing, watching the quiet settle. "I didn't free them for gratitude," I said quietly. Ceres stood beside me, silver eyes reflecting distant suns. I pressed a button because it was right. She inclined her head once. Beyond the hull, 1,000 futures moved outward under their own decisions. She stayed. And that was her choice.